Thank you for joining me today for Stories from Poplar Creek. Maybe you're having trouble falling asleep, or perhaps you're just starting your day. These stories are meant to keep you company wherever life finds you. If you enjoy these stories, please hit like or subscribe to hear the next chapter of Stories from Poplar Creek. And if there's a Buy Me a Coffee button somewhere on here, I'd be much obliged. See you on the other side. Chapter 2. Mrs. Pritchard didn't disguise her surprise when Dr. Turner appeared at her counter, but smiled in genuine welcome. Although Isaac was a man of competence and self-possession in most situations, he found himself lost. "Dr. Turner," explained Mrs. Pritchard, aware of his discomfort, "this is not only a shop for the ladies. We also make men's suits, and in the most current fashions, I assure you." Isaac blushed but smiled. "Thank you, Mrs. Pritchard. I'm here to solicit your advice." "My advice, Doctor?" "You can be assured I will give you my very best judgment," Mrs. Pritchard said earnestly, feeling honored by such solicitation. Isaac explained his errand. "My sister is to marry, you see, and I wanted to have a new dress made for the occasion." "Yes, I see," Mrs. Pritchard said excitedly. "It will be a pleasure to dress such a beautiful bride." Mrs. Pritchard rang a little bell on the counter, and from the back emerged a young woman, smartly dressed and serious. "Miss Williams, this is Dr. Turner. He is here to commission a dress for Miss Turner, soon to be Mrs. Alder. Please discuss suitable colors, and I'll fetch the book." "I'd be happy to, Mrs. Pritchard," replied Miss Williams before Mrs. Pritchard swept to the back room. "Your sister has lovely coloring, Dr. Turner, like afternoon light in the autumn. Here, I'll show you." "I would suggest the color of late wheat, butter yellow, or burnished green to bring out her eyes," Miss Williams explained, flipping through neat squares of fabric. Isaac was startled. "Is that how you see people, Miss Williams? Are you an artist, then?" "I suppose I am, in my own way. People are my canvas," replied Miss Williams practically. "And if I were to commission a suit, what colors would you suggest for me?" Isaac asked curiously, but wholly unprepared for the scrutiny. Miss Williams' brows furrowed in concentration. She leaned forward and looked at him closely with large green eyes. "You are much like your sister, although where she is brighter, you are somewhat darker." "Darker," sighed Isaac. "Yes, as if you were sitting under a tree and that same autumn light throws shadows through the leaves. I would suggest a deep green or deep cyan green. We have both if you care to see." Isaac nodded, oddly discomfited, but charmed. He wondered what it would be like to view the world like Miss Williams, but he thought better of it. Too much red in his world. Mrs. Pritchard emerged with her book of fashion plates and ushered Isaac to a chair, followed soon by tea. "Mrs. Pritchard, I will commission a dress of butter yellow and a coat of deep green for myself," Isaac instructed simply. Mrs. Pritchard smiled at Miss Williams. "Very well, Dr. Turner. I'm sure you've made a very good choice. Let me show you a few ideas I have." Isaac relented. "I am in your capable hands, Mrs. Pritchard." Dr. Turner left the Pritchards' establishment satisfied. It was as if he had stepped behind a screen into another world, but had managed to navigate it successfully. or they had managed him. It was certainly more gentle than the world he inhabited. But those strange green eyes unsettled him, as they had seen him as astutely as any physic with a microscope. Helen took Isaac's arm as she walked to the church in her new dress. Isaac smiled at her. "Do you like the dress?" he ventured. Helen paused and turned a dazzling smile on him. "You are a good and kind brother, Isaac. It is the most beautiful dress I could ever have imagined. I feel like sunlight." "You have been sunlight to me, Helen. Your smile does me good, old girl." They continued walking slowly to the church where James waited. The community assembled. The Reverend Caldwell officiated somberly, a tone strangely at odds with the bright smiles and good cheer. "Do you, James Alder, promise to love, honor, and cherish Helen as your lawfully wedded wife?" he intoned. "I do," James said quickly. "And do you, Helen Turner, promise to love, honor, and obey your husband?" There was an uncomfortable pause as Helen looked at the Reverend in confusion and then over to James. "Reverend, I would prefer that she promise to love, honor, and cherish me, please," James whispered to the offended Reverend Caldwell. Most irregular. "Do you, Helen Turner, promise to love, honor, and cherish your husband?" "I do," Helen beamed. "Then you may kiss the bride," Reverend Caldwell said sullenly. James took Helen's lips reverently and sweetly. "Thank you, Helen," James said quietly. As the afternoon waned and the feast began, Helen felt the impossible weight of happiness. Her world had shifted. James, her James now, kept hold of her hand as if he feared she might evaporate into the autumn sun. Faces of well-wishers seemed to swim in Helen's vision, their features gentled by the honey-gold light filtering through the maple trees that bordered the churchyard feast. The tablecloths rippled in the gentle breeze, fabric catching the mellow afternoon light, while plates piled with harvest bounty created a patchwork of autumn colors. The party lasted until dusk, when the first lamps were lit and the children began to nod in their mother's arms. There were toasts made in the local whiskey, and a clumsy but heartfelt waltz on the church's plank floor, and even a song sung by James himself. The old women said it was the happiest wedding Poplar Creek had ever managed, and the young women especially remembered every detail in hopes they might one day wear the same smile Helen had worn. James and Helen were young, intelligent, and energetic, and the Alderland prospered under their care and a wide blue sky. James would often seek out Jonas Ingram and the other farmers who had been scratching in the dirt for a lifetime. Helen cherished those moments, watching her husband lean against weathered fence posts with men twice his age, their voices low as they spoke of rainfall patterns and soil conditions from seasons long past. In his mind, James sketched invisible maps of where wheat might thrive and which hillsides would favor his apple trees. The way he listened and absorbed their knowledge earned him something precious in Poplar Creek: respect. With feelings of genuine kinship, the townfolk remembered the skinny, freckled boy with sad eyes and took genuine pleasure in seeing him grown into a broad-shouldered man of promise. Helen had carved her own place in Poplar Creek's affections. She could be spotted kneeling beside a struggling reader, her hands steady on their shoulder, or walking home with a cluster of children listening to their stories with genuine interest that made even the shyest speak up. The townspeople never saw an instance where Helen would show preference or speak down to barefoot children or insult the dignity of their parents. Helen understood that education wasn't charity bestowed from above, but a practical tool. When she explained to a farmer how geometry could help him calculate acreage, or showed a shopkeeper's daughter how bookkeeping might double the family business, resistance melted away. It was a calm night, but Reverend Caldwell was unsettled. He was even sharpish with his children and sat silent with his wife. Church was not as well attended on Sundays as it had been for the wedding. Though polite, people's smiles faded when he shook their hands after service, and that business with the wedding vows made him bristle. He insisted on having a supper in his study where he could search Scripture. He didn't sleep well, but blamed it on the cheese. The next morning, Reverend Caldwell sat again in the quiet of his study, determined to shake the previous evening's mood and write his Sunday sermon. The children were in school, and Mrs. Caldwell was in town on errands. He sat at his desk and took out a fresh piece of paper. As he put ink to paper, the disquietude of the previous evening returned, and to further his irritation, a songbird started a lively melody outside his window, breaking his concentration at every turn. Although the good Reverend was not a man to curse, he thought one very loudly. He reached over to lower the window, shutting out the disruptive little bird. Unfortunately, or not, the tenacious little song persisted through the glass. Now, on most days, a songbird is just a songbird, but this morning the bird became the voice of Providence. As it sang, the Reverend grasped at the thread of a thought. His mind meandered to the memory of his trip to Carmody for the chapter council meeting. There had been much discussion on doctrine and such, but he had occasion to stroll through town one evening. As he walked in happy concentration, his thoughts were interrupted by the lively sound of a piano in the saloon. It was well known that the men flocked to the saloon to hear the piano as much as for the company of women. Through the windows he could see the room full to bursting and more revelers on the walk outside. He recollected thinking at the time how those folks would be better served lining the pews. The little bird continued his raucous song when the idea struck him. His church would have a piano. Reverend Caldwell was a man on fire. His sermon would shake the floorboards and rally the congregation. His small flock were happy to see the Reverend occupied with a firm direction that avoided the usual criticisms he was known to hand out. At last, funds were secured, and the Reverend Caldwell placed his order for the new church piano with Goodwin's Mercantile. It would be much talked of throughout the territory. He imagined his church becoming a Mecca for poor souls in search of guidance. It was a fine day when the shipping cart rolled onto Main Street. Reverend Caldwell stood at the front of the waiting crowd, feeling it his finest hour. The drivers, Mr. Whitlock and his number 2, Mr. Macready, came into view dusty and muddy from the day's ride. The crowd applauded as the cart came to a stop, creaking under the weight of its load. Jonas Ingram and several other men were on hand to move the piano to the church. Reverend Caldwell followed along like a nervous mother. "Careful now. Easy does it. Watch that pedal." At last the piano was in place, and tears watered Reverend Caldwell's eyes. "It's a mighty fine thing you've done, Reverend," observed Joseph Ingram. "We are eager to hear you play on Sunday." Reverend Caldwell's throat went dry. In his fervor, he hadn't given thought to who might play. He felt his knees go weak. "Of course," continued Jonas, "I understand that Helen Alder plays and sings very well." Reverend Caldwell smiled nervously. Once alone, he ran for his coat and hat and saddled up to pay Mr. Alder a visit, to secure his permission to have his wife play at Sunday sermon. Helen consented, and the arrangements made. Helen would play at Sunday service. And so James and Helen were woven into the warp and weft of life in Poplar Creek. As their land prospered, so did Helen's belly, and the women of town were determined to stand in the place of a mother that Helen had lost. They were generous with their wisdom, leaning over their tea to share the best ways to calm colic and teething gums. Helen let them wrap her up in their maternal caretaking. Having errands to complete one morning, Helen stepped into the Goodwins Mercantile. Evelyn greeted her brightly. "Helen, dear, have you met Mrs. Hastings?" Helen held out her hand. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Hastings. I'm pleased to meet you." The door jingled again and large footsteps announced a large man with long hair and a black coat. Seeing the women, he removed his hat and retreated to the opposite side of the shop, carefully examining the dry goods on the shelf. Ezra Thornton was an imposing figure at the best of times. He lived up the mountain, coming to town only when need be. He had a wild look that caused women to keep their distance. But among the men he was respected. They understood his choice to remove to the mountain. Ezra had been through the war, and like many returning men, he retreated to the peace of seclusion, not knowing how to manage in society. "Good afternoon, Mr. Thornton," called Evelyn cheerily. "Please make yourself to home. I'll be with you shortly. Your new books came in." He nodded and returned to the items on the shelf, trying to make himself as out of the way as a man his size could. Eleanor smiled and nodded to Mr. Thornton before returning to Helen. "Please call me Eleanor." "Eleanor is our midwife," explained Evelyn. "May I have a word with you, Mrs. Alder?" Helen nodded. "Helen, please. Would you like to walk a bit, Eleanor?" The two women crossed to the door, Mr. Thornton nodding and shifting out of their way. "Afternoon, ma'am," he mumbled to the women. Helen and Eleanor walked along the boardwalk, taking in the sunshine and blue sky. "I understand your brother is Dr. Turner. That must be a comfort to you," Eleanor observed. Helen removed her bonnet to let the sun warm her. "It is, but I worry I'm asking too much of him." "I understand. If you like, I can explain to you how I might be of use, and you can decide if I can be of any service. It may be nice to have another woman present for the more delicate situations, such as bathing, stitching, and such. I can also help with suppers and cleaning while you're in your time." "Oh, Eleanor, that would be wonderful. Yes." "I've seen 37 women through. If you have any questions, you just let me know. With your permission, I'd like to speak with your brother and make sure he's comfortable with the situation. While he attends to the baby, I can tend to you." The two women walked along, making a handsome sight. Helen was glowing, and the sun caught the auburn in Eleanor's chestnut hair. They took to talking, and a quick recognition of friendship sparked between them. As is the way with the young, Helen and James raised a few eyebrows with their new-fangled ideas. People were surprised that Helen would have a man attending the birthing bed, even if it was the doctor and her brother. "It's not a man's province," declared Reverend Caldwell, while his wife silently nodded in agreement. Another fangle that James and Helen discovered was her aptitude for ranch business. Not only did she have a head for numbers and ledgers, but Isaac had given her an education in science that proved useful in animal and plant health. She absorbed everything she could read about crop management and new studies in animal husbandry. One evening, Helen approached James with an idea. "James, what do you think about having me give up the school to help manage around here?" James put down his book. I thought you loved teaching. I wouldn't want you to give it up if you want to keep the class." "I do love it, but I'm thinking I'm ready for a new challenge. Would you be willing to take me on?" James pulled her to his lap and kissed her neck. "I have to admit that I hoped you'd want to." James was relieved. Not only was he the first to recognize Helen's talent and appreciate her partnership, but he also liked having her close to home where he could watch out for her, though he had the good sense not to say it out loud. He loved the child growing in her, but had a gnawing fear for her welfare. He knew too well the realities of childbirth. The country was seeded with the broken hearts of widowers and tiny graves. That night, as James and Helen lay in their bed, Helen shifted to see his face. "James," she whispered, "I know you're afraid." James said nothing but pulled her closer. James, please, look at me. James put his face near hers. Helen continued, Eleanor is going to come and stay with us when my time is near, and Isaac, he's very skilled. James caressed her cheek. Helen continued gently, James, should anything happen, Isaac is a surgeon. James felt a shadow settle in his bones and a panic rise. He saves you, Helen. You, do you hear me? If something happens, Helen replied with quiet steel, he saves who he can, and you will not recriminate him for any choice he makes. You must promise me, James. My brother would break with any decision he made, but only he would know in the moment who he can save. James opened his mouth to argue, but Ellen cut him off. I am young and strong and healthy, and James, there is love, so much love, keeping me tethered. You know I would never leave you without one hell of a fight. Helen, I can't. What would I do? He buried his face in her neck and hair. You would drown yourself in the love of our people. You'd breathe it in until your lungs want to burst. You'd let them help you find one step and then the next. James kissed her deeply, caressing her face. Do you promise me, James? He makes the decisions about what can be done. He makes the decisions, James said darkly. Helen sat up and straddled herself on James, shrugging her chemise free. He started to sit up to meet her lips. She kissed him and then gently pushed him back. I'm frightened too, James. I need your strength, all of it. She took him inside and started to move on him. James took her hips and watched her, mesmerized. The moon shone through the lace curtains onto her hair and face and illuminated her breasts and rounded belly. She was so achingly beautiful. Her head fell back and her eyes closed as she felt pleasure rise. He realized then that Helen was a part of some ancient lineage of women, stretching back through time, and that he was not a part of it. He served her reverently. Her breathing became ragged and her hair spilled over her shoulders. I need your strength, James, Helen said huskily. Take it, Helen. I will give you every last bit of myself, every last breath. There in the light of Mother Moon, Helen was a warrior, goddess, and divine ferocity. Her body arched as her ecstasy took her, and he followed humbly, accepting her benediction. When he was old and his life was ebbing, James was certain that the memory of this moment would see him home, and he would be at peace.